Hey designers, in this video, we'll create an amazing text animation without using any plugins. Let's dive in. Start by creating a new composition. Use the text tool to type out your desired text. Once done, align it vertically and horizontally within the composition. We'll duplicate this text layer to use it as a reference. Select the text layer and press Ctrl+D to duplicate it. Lock this duplicated layer, as we'll use it only to guide the placement of individual letters. On the duplicated reference layer, delete all the letters except the first one, let's say A. Position this A on top of its corresponding spot in the original text. Duplicate this layer again by pressing Ctrl+D, replace it with the next letter, C, and position it over its spot. Repeat this process for all the letters. Duplicate again, replace the letter with E, and position it. For the last element, which is a full stop, duplicate the layer once more, replace the text with a period, and adjust its position. Once all letters are placed, zoom in and refine their positions to make sure they align perfectly. When this step is complete, we no longer need the reference layer. Unlock and delete it. Now, we'll convert these text layers into shape layers so we can manipulate them further. Right-click on each text layer, go to Create, and choose Create Shapes from Text. Repeat this for all individual letters, including the full stop. Select all these shape layers by holding Shift and clicking on them. Move these shape layers to the top of the layer stack. Once all the shape layers are created, go ahead and delete all the original text layers as we no longer need them. Now, let's animate the letters. Press P on your keyboard to bring up the position property. Click the stopwatch icon next to position to add the first keyframe. Move the timeline indicator 10 frames forward. You can do this quickly by pressing Ctrl+Shift+right arrow. At this point, add a blank keyframe for each layer by clicking the diamond icon next to position. Repeat this step, move another 10 frames forward and add another blank keyframe. Now, return to the first keyframe. This creates the initial movement. Next, go to the second keyframe and move all the letters upwards, slightly above their original positions. Finally, play back the animation to see how it looks. Select all the layers and press Shift+S to bring up the scale property. Click on the stopwatch next to scale to set the first keyframe. Move the timeline indicator to the second keyframe. Unlink the scale values by clicking the chain icon. Set the Y value to 120 for all layers. Next, move to the third keyframe and adjust the Y value back to 100. Now, move the timeline indicator 3 frames forward, use Ctrl+right arrow 3 times, and set the Y value to 80. Move forward 3 more frames and change the Y value to 110. Finally, go 3 frames forward again and set the Y value back to 100. Preview the animation to see the bounce effect on the letters. Now, let's animate the path for the letters. Start by arranging your layers, place the A layer on top, followed by C, and then E, to maintain sequence. Select the A outline layer and use the search bar to find path. Click the stopwatch next to both paths to set the first keyframe. Press U to view the keyframes only. Move the timeline indicator to the last frame and add a blank keyframe for both paths. Then return to the first frame of the path property. You might notice there are 2 paths. This happens because the text has been converted into shapes. The first path represents the inner circle, and the second path represents the outer one. Now, let's adjust the first path. Select its first keyframe and use the pen tool. While holding Alt, reshape the path into a custom form, then double-click it to bring up the transform controls. Shrink the shape until it's very small and nearly invisible. For the second path, select the pen tool, hold Alt, and click the keyframes to make them corner points. Now, let's refine the path to create a rectangle shape. Select each anchor point of the letter A one by one. Turn on the grid to help with alignment. As you adjust the anchor points, form a rectangle, but remember not to delete any anchor points. Deleting an anchor point would affect all the paths, and we don't want that. We want to morph the shape from a rectangle to the letter, so carefully adjust the points to create the rectangular shape. Once you've turned it into a rectangle, press Alt on your keyboard and select all the anchor points on the right side. Then, use the arrow keys to bring them closer together, making the rectangle narrower. Repeat the same for the left side anchor points to thin the shape. When you preview, you'll see that the rectangle now morphs into the letter A. Next, move on to the letter C, search for the path property and click the stopwatch next to it. Move the timeline indicator to the last frame and add a blank keyframe there. Press U to show only the keyframes for the C layer. Now, move back to the first frame and use the pen tool. While holding Alt, adjust the anchor points to turn the shape into a rectangle. Since the letter C only has one path, this is a simpler task compared to A. For the letter E, you'll notice that it has two paths, just like A, because of the inner and outer shapes. Using the pen tool, adjust the anchor points to create a rectangle. Once the rectangle is in place, select all the anchor points on the right side and move them closer together using the arrow keys. Do the same for the anchor points on the left side, narrowing the rectangle. Once the previous steps are done, repeat the same process for the C layer. Click the stopwatch next to both of the paths. Move the timeline indicator to the last frame and add a blank keyframe. Now, move back to the first frame, and using the pen tool, hold Alt on your keyboard and draw a rectangle shape. After that, double-click on the rectangle to access the transform controls and reduce the hollow space inside it to make it as small as possible, almost invisible. Next, use the pen tool to adjust the curved areas by holding Alt and clicking on the anchor points to convert them to sharp corners. Once you've done that, make the necessary adjustments to thin out the rectangle shape. You can now disable the grid since it's no longer needed. Press P to view only the position keyframes. Select all the keyframes and press F9 to apply Easy Ease. Then, go to the graph editor and adjust the graph to match the required curve. After that, return to the timeline and press U to view all the keyframes. Select all the keyframes again and press F9 to apply Easy Ease once more. Next, select the dot layer, press P for position, and click the stopwatch next to the position property. Select any other layer and press P to see their position keyframes, as we will make the keyframes for the dot layer accordingly. Click the stopwatch next to position on the dot layer and move the timeline indicator to the second frame. Add a blank keyframe here. Then, move the timeline indicator to the third frame and add another blank keyframe. Change the X value of the dot, moving it slightly to the left. At the second keyframe, position the dot on top. Take the pen tool, hold Alt, and click on the first anchor point to curve it. Adjust it as needed. Then, hold Alt and click on the second anchor point to curve that side as well. Now, let's animate the scale. Press Shift plus S to reveal the scale property, click the stopwatch next to it, and move the timeline indicator to the second frame to add a blank keyframe. Go back to the first frame and reduce the scale. After all the adjustments, you're done. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to Ace Design.